Daniel Brody has a category that says brochas and benching in a dirty place. So if you bench a place where there was excrement or urine, is that a valid benching, or does it have to be done again? So recapping, tefillah and shema. When it comes to tefillah and saying of the shema, if after davening one found excrement in front of him or to the side of him within 4 amas, that's about 2 meters.
Yeah.
His tefillah is invalid and he must do it again. The reason is because he should have checked the place he was praying in beforehand and only then started davening. But if he found urine in the place that he davened, he does not repeat. So again,
Did you say the last part again? If he
so
doesn't,
basically, what he's saying is that you've got an obligation generally to check if there is the feces or urine around the area that you davening at. However, if you find within about 2 meters around you, your circumference around you, that after you davened, you found excrement, which is poop, basically, in front of him, to the side of him, your tefillah is invalid. You must do it again.
okay.
Because that's the reason. However, we're not as stringent with urine. You don't have to repeat the davening. It's not ideal, but you don't have to repeat it. With regards to Birkat Hamazon, benching brochas and other words of Torah, to be sure, it's forbidden lechatchila. So lechatchila means if you know in advance. You can't do something where you know in advance that that there is anything wrong. So if you can see in front of you that there's excrement or urine, you can't start learning words of Torah or benching or doing brachas. But lechatchila, I mean, after the fact, I think you basically have to go from the Torah wording that says your camp must be holy. So it's a word warning that holy words are only permitted in a place that is clean. The issue here is if you did it already. Now, Bidi Evet means after the fact. Lechatchila means beforehand. So obviously, Lechatchila, you're not allowed to do it. But Bidi Evet is after the fact. So Bidi Evet, if you found urine, your davening is not invalid. After the fact, if you found excrement there, it's invalid. Okay? That's one thing to bear in mind. If you knowingly benched or made a brocha in a place that you knew had excrement, you must repeat it. If your allotted time to bench has passed for a big meal, and you start to get hungry for a small meal, which is about 72 minutes, then you must not repeat it. Needless to say, if one benched or made a brocha in front of urine, he must not repeat it. So there's something to note. Excrement of a human, like a child, is stricter than that of dogs and other animals, as it creates a problem even if there's no smell. But that of an animal is only forbidden when there's a smell. Now, I never knew that. So next week, we've got the exciting episode of we'll deal with brochas when one is drunk. Okay. I wanted to do this. I think this one came up before Simchat Torah. No, I'm teasing, it didn't. But this is from the Mishnah Brura, chapter 185, section 5, and the Shulchan Aruch, section 76. And that source about that your camp must be holy is from Devarim chapter 23, verse 15. Okay? So good. All right, guys, let's get started. I hope that was a nice addition.
Very nice.
And
Yeah,
obviously,
very good. Thanks.
emails come banging into my email, turns around and makes this charming sound, which is charming. Okay, let's just go into it. All right. Now, we were on the end of Daf 20A1, where we talk about abnormal behavior of an animal jumping for food. And we said in that case, obviously, being abnormal behavior, that it's not no, it's not the same as when an animal has shown in the private domain. So, let's go to the next inquiry, which we didn't want to start yesterday. Rav Zaira inquired, if it is rolling, what is the law? Now, Kevin, I just want to ask you one big favor. Are you able to, I'm just going to take of speakerphone until you. So I'll hear you if you have a question, then I'll put you back on speakerphone. Does that make sense? Is that all right with you? So if you have any question, just let me know. All right. So another inquiry. Rav Zera inquired, if it is rolling, what is the law? So the Gemara explains, what is this case of rolling? So it's a case where straw is situated in the private domain, okay? And it's rolling and coming from the private domain to the public domain. And what are we talking about here? So if you think about it, you're talking about like a bale of hay. And you've got a bale of hay that's in the private domain, and it's rolling towards the public domain. So the question is, we're going to differentiate between a case of an animal dragging and where it's actually rolling out of its own momentum. So, for example, if the animal is dragging it out of the private domain into the public domain, where it actually eats the straw. So the question is this: do we follow the place from which the animal takes the straw? In other words, the damaged party's yard, the private domain. Then it's a case of Shane in the damaged party's yard, of which are we liable or not liable, guys?
Liable.
Liable completely.
Exactly. So what we want to do is, do we take it from the place where the animal takes the straw, where it drags it out from? So from the private domain, therefore the animal is liable, or do we take the case where the animal actually eats the straw, in other words, if it dragged it from that place and then it started eating it in the public domain, at which you're not responsible for shame, there's no obligation to pay. We want to know, do you follow a place from which the animal takes the straw, the public domain, or where the owner is not liable, or do you take it to the place where the animal starts to eat, which is the public domain in this particular case, where there is no liability? Does that make sense in terms of the argument?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Arth?
Yeah,
Sorry to put you on the spot. Are you able to repeat the argument, or do you want to take a pass this time?
I'll take a pass.
Do you want to take a stab at it?
No, I'll take a pass. I like taking passes.
Okay. So can any of you take a stab at it? What I've just said. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. I'm okay with it.
Okay, Damon, just say it again slowly, maybe then I'll take a strike at it.
Okay, I'll say it. I'll repeat it.
Okay.
Good. Great, Michael.
All right. It's a simple situation of, we know that an animal, whether it's Shane, whether it's Regal, is liable on someone's private property. It's full damages. Okay. Now the question now is, what happens if an animal in either of those situations, just for example, drags some hay from a private domain where they're fully liable for damages to a public domain? Are they actually liable if they eat it in the public domain? Or alternatively, the other way around, where they're not liable in the public domain and they drag it into a private domain and eat it? Would it be liable then? I don't know if that makes sense. So we're just saying where the animal drags it from, is it liable from the place it dragged it from and not to the place it dragged it to, or it doesn't work the other way around? So I hope that explains it.
Perfect. Marco, I wish I could bottle you up.
There's Arthur, you got it. Is that explain it?
Yeah, sort of, I think. I'm grasping it.
Okay, I don't think I explained as well as Damon.
No. It's not you. It's me. It's like my brain doesn't rev up first thing in the morning. It takes a while to get up to full pressure. So it's like I'll hear it like 5-6 times, and eventually I'll say, "Oh, okay."
Marco, you explained it better than me. So 4 bullet points. Okay.
Can I just add something to that? Sorry, Damon, quickly.
Yeah.
How do we know that the animal dragged it? If there are no witnesses, that the animal dragged it from one domain to the other.
Okay, so Gavin, this is always a case that comes up in Sanhedrin, where it makes a certain premise, and I've said in the shir many times before we started the Agadic part of Sanhedrin, well, where's your evidence for that? who saw it?
Mm.
How do we know? And the standard answer from Rabbi Cohen Shir to all of us is the premise is set by these artificial cases. So we're not trying here to have an actual trial in terms of determining in a court setting who saw the animal drag it from place A to B. We are trying to learn fundamental halachic principles. So when we're learning halachic principles, the default position is it's set to say incident happened as such and such, and it goes without saying that you don't have to prove it because it's not an actual case. It's teaching
Okay.
principles through an artificial case where it's deemed you have the correct amount of witnesses. They had tape recorders, they had magnifying glasses, they had binoculars, whatever you needed, they had. And everybody was waiting for the animal to take it from point A to B. So don't worry about that. So in point of what Michael was saying, and he said it much more succinctly than me, is the first thing that you have to determine is to know the law. In a private domain, you're responsible for Shane payment. If your animal damaged in somebody else's yard, you have to pay. If it ate in somebody else's yard, fine. In the public domain, you do not have to pay because the verse says of Shane and Regal, if he sent his animal forth and it consumes in the field of another. Fine. Now that we got that principle, this particular statement is asking one question. Just like before when we learned a question of rubber and rubber, where does the process calculated from? The starting point or the ending point? So the starting point here is the location where the straw bale started off. In other words, if we say it's the starting point and it starts off in the private domain and the animal drags it to the public domain, then if it's the starting point in the private domain, you pay, but in the public domain where it eats, you would still have to pay because we're working from the starting point. In other words, don't get confused by public domain private. Just ask yourself one question: do we calculate it from where the food, the source of the food, where it started, not where the food ended up, or do we calculate where the animal actually ate? Because where the animal actually ate, if it's private domain, you pay. If it's public domain, you don't. If it's worked out to where the food was originally from, well, that's the source at which you pay. So it's that principle that we're trying to determine. Just like with the utensil, was it that starting point where it became rego muad, or where the utensil, what do you call it, flew off and smashed in a different location? Starting point catalyst, or where the animal eats. That's all we're trying to find out here. And Michael said it brilliantly. Okay. So I'm just gonna continue with the daf. Now this entire daf is according to Rashi's opinion. So Tosfot rejects Rashi's explanation for two reasons. Okay, we're in 28:2. He objects because the Gemara here seems to leave the inquiry unresolved in daf 20, because in 23a, what it indicates is that we actually fall in where the animal eats the food, not the place from which the animal takes it. But just one thing that you've got to bear in mind as far as Rashi is concerned, that's not necessarily a reason for rejection. Why? Because information that we've learned gets rejected as we learn more information. Are you with me, guys? So in other words, there were certain principles we learned in earlier dafs, and what happens is as it adds more complexity and layers to an issue, we learn when that situation is appropriate to apply it. And based on that, the simple answer is that at this point it might be a question, but in future it might be resolved. So all we're saying is it's clearly a case that on 23a it's clarified it's where the animal eats the food, not the place where it takes it. Now Tosfot has another argument. Rashi's explanation is not at all implied by the expression rolling. So what did we say the distinction was here? Where we're saying is here is where the animal dragged it. What do we mean dragged it? It grabbed food from here with its mouth and then took it from say it was found, the animal's wandering, and it found in somebody's private domain, a basket of barley or a bale of barley or whatever, wheat or whatever, and grabbed it and then took it with it towards the public domain. We used to have an Alsatian, and all of a sudden it would rock up with bones. We don't know where it got the bones. Somebody's shoe once in the park. I don't know. We heard somebody scream and it took somebody's shoe. And we rocked up, the dog rocked up with the shoe from point A to B. Animals pick up stuff from one domain and then start to munch it in a different domain. So we're saying that the process here was not addressed. Tosfot said Rashi didn't address the process of rolling. Rolling is a different issue. That's where you're dealing with a hill. And at the top of the hill, there is a bale of hay, right? Now, that bale of hay is in a private domain and it's rolling towards the public domain, or it's in the public domain and rolling towards a private domain. So there's a natural momentum where it is going to end up in a certain place. And what we're saying is there that the question is slightly different because the animal never dragged it. The animal was actually stopping it. So say that it was going to roll into the public domain, and it was in the private domain, and the animal let it roll and it arrived in the public domain. Then if it's about the eating, then the animal's owner is not liable because it ended up in the public domain. But there's still a question of, if you know in the 23rd daf that it's the animal eating, but the animal stopped the momentum when it was in the private domain and started chomping in the private domain as it was going down, is that you stopping momentum. It's not a separate act. When we're talking about the 23rd daf, we're talking about an act of dragging. So the Gemara separates the difference between action one, the animal lifts something up or drags it. Action two, the animal consumes it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For saying that Rashi doesn't address the word here about rolling. So that's something that I just wanted to bring to your attention. Okay. And just give me 1 second, guys. So Tosfot explains Rav Zayras differently. He refers to a bale of straw that is in the process of rolling, which is part of the sense of expression. So do we say it's a case of shane in the public domain, since the bale would have ended up in the public domain anyway? In other words, it rolled from the private domain to the public. Or perhaps say it's a case of in the damaged party's yard, since in the final analysis, right, that's where the animal has eaten the straw. Does that make sense? So we're going to see what the actual case is.
Okay.
In any event, there's a difference between the two distinct acts of taking and eating. So in that case, when the two distinct acts and it's not a case of rolling, we follow the place in which the animal actually ate the food, and that's according to Nachalas David. Okay. However, in the case of rolling, the animal's taking of the food is the beginning of her act of eating. So Rav Zayra inquires whether we view the eating as starting from the moment the animal takes the food from that place, or where it ended up in. All right. So I just wanted to add this background. It seems like quite a complicated background, but you're going to see where it's becoming in really the 23rd daf. So the Gemara comes to seek this inquiry, and it resolves it in the following way. It tries to come learn and prove from the following brisa. For Rav Chia taught in a brisa that states, this is the law concerning a load of feed that was partially inside the private domain and partially outside in the public domain. So if the animal ate inside, she, the owner, is liable. And if she ate outside, she, the owner, is not liable. So it's not referring to our very case of rolling and coming, and the inquiry is it thus resolved? So the Gemara rejects the proof. Why? Because you could interpret the Brisa's ruling as follows. No matter where the animal eats, the content of the sack, what is initially inside, she is liable, and for what is initially outside, she's not liable. So then this particular Brisa is talking about a different case. It's talking about percentile. Does that make sense, guys?
Like a percentage.
Percentile.
Yeah,
I
it's just a percentage of what's in and what's out. You're liable
In other
for.
words,
Yeah.
as Michael says, the animal's eating and 30% is in the private domain. You pay for that 30% it ate in the private domain. If 70% was in the public domain, you don't pay for that remainder 70%. So we're saying that this particular Brisa doesn't resolve this issue because all it's saying is that you eat according to the percentage of what was inside obligating you, and you don't pay for what was outside not obligating you. Fine.
Pay for private, not public, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. So an alternative way of rejecting the proof, you can say, according to Rav Chia, is speaking about a case of a load of espasta. I don't know if you guys know what espasta is.
Say that again. What?
Espasta.
As
What for what?
pasta? Is it as
Pasta.
as spaghetti or as pasta? What?
That's cute, man. That's very cute. All right.
It's animal pizza. I don't know.
All right.
Extra cheese.
Extra cheese. All right. So, so I just want to introduce something to you.
Okay.
So you've got a sack of barley, right?
Yeah.
And half of it was lying in the private domain and half in the public. The animal, the Brisa, the previous Brisa is even a little bit more complicated than that. It said if the animal ate the contents inside, but she was standing in the private domain and pulling all the contents to water in order to eat them, the owner is liable. If, however, she ate the contents outside and she's standing in the public domain and pulling all the contents towards her to eat them, she's not liable. Accordingly, we see the Brisa is trying to determine whether a case of Shane in the private domain or Shane in the public domain, we follow the place where the animal actually eats the food, not from where she pulls it.
Okay.
So what we're saying is with this case of the Esparta, according to Rashi, is it emerges we follow the place in the food was initially grown when the animal took it, not the place where she actually ate it. So we can't prove anything from the Brisa. So Rashi's interpretation, I just wanted to explain to you from the previous one, he's saying you don't take a case of actual percentile or percentages of where the animal ate. He said that's too obvious. We're saying that it's in a particular domain and an animal is grabbing it and then chewing. But this part is public domain and this is private. So is it from the place where it's actually grown or is it in the place for actual consumption? So that's where they bring up this Esparta. So Esparta, it's a different word. That's a Latin word. In Hebrew, I'll try and find the Hebrew. It's called patilla. So patilla means wick in Hebrew. And it's actually these long growing stalks. And they grow very, very quickly. You can think of it like giant wheat bamboo or willow trees, where there's a lot of wispy stuff. And what happens is they cut them down to make animal fodder so that the animal can eat. And the problem with that is that it's long. So in other words, it could be growing in one particular location, the private domain, and it's heading over into the public domain. So do we say that in a case like Esparta where the animal eats it and drags it, and it's eating it in the public domain, that you're not liable because the animal is eating in the public domain. It's standing in the public domain, but it's dragging it where even though the stalks, the end parts are in the public domain, the stalks and the roots are all based in the private domain. So it's grown from the private, the stalks are in the public, and as it's eating, it's pulling these things towards it. But its growth point is in the private domain. So are you obligated or are you not obligated? That's what it's saying. Is it where the animal eats or where it's actually sources? And that's why it's using this as pasta, because you're liable for even the half. Um, okay, so the plain meaning is if the animal stands, okay, let's work it out. If the animal standing inside and eats the entire load of pasta, she's liable for the half that was initially situated outside. So if she stands outside and eats it all, she's not liable for the half that was initially situated inside. Still, this doesn't prove that in general we follow the place in which the animal eats the food, because the case of aspasta is different. In the case of the aspasta stalks, dragging one end of the stalk automatically causes the other end to come along with it. And it's viewed as the whole load in one place, namely the place where the animal was eating. So that seems to resolve this inquiry. It doesn't matter if initially it belonged in the private domain. The animal's owner is not liable, because if there was enough of these stalks that were in the public domain, the owner of the aspasta should have taken care to put a fence or make sure it was pushed in the next direction. Because obviously, if an animal has access to it in the public domain and is taking the stalks and they get ripped out of the ground, it's not the animal's owner's fault. It's the fault of the person that's grown it in a private domain, that they're not careful. So that's what we're trying to learn. But the reason why aspasta is a unusual case is because if the animal is standing inside and begins eating the end of the stalk lying there, and it's drawing the other end towards it in the private domain, but some of it is in public, you've got the opposite problem. And what's that problem? Is that it's no longer considered free for all because it's a public domain. So it doesn't matter where it starts off; it's where the animal eats, even in aspasta. But the reason why Rosaris query is about kernels. So what does he mean kernels? We're not talking corn kernels, we're talking wheat kernels. It's a short piece of straw, and those are always in one domain. They never grow long enough to be separate domain. So at the moment we learn, according to Rashi, that we learn obligation from where the animal is eating it. Now, in the Beis Lechem, we actually going to, in the Beis Lechem Yehuda, in section 69, we're going to start to learn, I think on the 23rd daf, of this case of rolling food from one domain to the other because of the venue change, because that's got a momentum of its own. Okay? Right, let me just see how long we've got. We've got 5 minutes. All right, and let me just fly through, and then we can go to a different case. All right. So the Gemara now elaborates on a section of the Mishnah that reads, the animal ate a garment, her owner pays half the damage. When are these things said? On the damaged party's premises. But in the public domain, he is not liable. Now, guys, I'm going to read this again because you'll find there's something very, very wrong with this part of the Mishnah from initial reading. I'm going to read it again. The animal eats a garment, right? Her owner pays half the damage. When are these things said? In the damaged party's yard. So that's fine. Only Rabbi Tarfon says for an act of keren, that you pay half payment damage, full payment damages in the damaged party's yard. But the rabbis, Kevin, all say that whether it's in the public domain or the damaged party's yard, you pay half damages for keren tam. And why would you pay keren when the animal ate a garment, guys?
Unusual.
Unusual, yes.
Unusual.
Animals don't usually eat laundry. Goats sometimes do, but animals generally don't eat laundry. So why does it say in the Mishnah, in the public domain, if the animal ate a garment, you are not liable? Because we learned that eating laundry is unusual. It's a destructive act. Keren is often described as a destructive act, to injure or kill or destroy. And the other aspect of keren is it's unusual. So since this is an act of keren, are we obligated in the public domain for keren?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Normally you are.
Yes.
You're not exempt. Karen, you're not exempt in the public domain.
Correct. Why?
Because Hashem said so.
Yeah, because yeah, animals can can harm each other in any area, including a public domain.
Okay, because there's no pasuk limitation. There's no pasuk limitation. Shannon Regal says, if you send forth the animal in the field of another and it consumes, that's a limitation in terms of the field of another with regards to liability obligation. In Keren, there's no such pasuk, which means no matter what area the animal damages, you're obligated. So why does it say here in the public domain he is not liable? Because eating a garment is a case of unusual destructive damage.
Yeah. Also, just to add one thing with Karen, in the public domain, you're liable because it's not. I mean, it's not normal behavior, So that's why you're liable in the public domain.
No, that's not the reason. Because
if you look at Regal and Shane, that's normal behavior. It's a normal behavior of an animal, Regal and Shane. That's why you're not liable in the public domain. Whereby Karen is not normal behavior. It's aggressive behavior by the animal.
Well, maybe you're saying something correct in that maybe you're saying by logic the pasuk is there because whenever there's a spiritual principle, there might be a logical principle as well. But so that might be the case. We learn primarily that scriptural law supersedes Sphora logic. Yeah. But to me, it sounds logical, Gavin. What you're saying is that how can you be liable in the public domain for Shane and Regal because it's the animal's natural movement?
True.
But I would suggest in secular law, if you had a cow that galloped and killed a small boy by trampling over him, you would have a court case. So I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah. Guys, we're going to determine next lesson why you're not obligated for this case of Karen in the public